This video is going to go over Chapter 17, Objective 6. We're going to take a look at the two mechanisms by which hormones bring about effects on the target tissue. So basically, when the hormone reaches the target, wherever it's going after it travels through the bloodstream, what happens next? How does it actually get to the cell and tell the cell what to do? So hormones affect their target tissue. So after they get released from the gland, travel through the bloodstream, and make it to the target cell, those hormones are going to cause a change in that target cell. All major hormones circulate virtually to all the tissues. But remember, it's only those target tissues or target cells that have the right receptor for that hormone that are going to be affected. So in other words, not all tissues and cells have the receptors for every single hormone. So just because a hormone's present doesn't mean it's going to actually affect that tissue, just the ones that have the receptors. Hormones bring about characteristics by altering the target cell activity. So they're going to tell that target cell what to do. They're going to, for instance, increase or decrease the rates of normal cell processes. For instance, are they going to stimulate a muscle to contract or not to contract? You might remember some of this from Chapter 10 back in A&P 1 when we talked about how the nervous system affected skeletal muscles. Similar, okay, we were secreting acetylcholine. So similar, instead of a neurotransmitter, it's a hormone. A hormone typically produces one or more of the following changes in the target cell. So what kind of things are the target cell going to do when it realizes there's a hormone attached? Well, it could change the plasma membrane, allowing opening and closing of various ion channels to allow things to enter or not enter the cell. The target cell could also stimulate the synthesis or making of other enzymes and other proteins within the cell. So it could tell the cell to start making some enzyme or protein. It could activate or deactivate enzymes within the cell. It could induce secretory activity, meaning it could cause something to leave the cell. Or it could stimulate the cell to undergo mitosis. So these are just some of the changes, typical changes, that could result from a hormone attaching to a receptor on a cell. Now, hormones act at the receptors of target cells in one of two ways. Now, this is where it goes back, and you have to know the difference between those water-soluble hormone properties versus those lipid-soluble hormone properties. If it's a water-soluble hormone, you have to remember this hormone cannot pass through the membrane. It cannot get inside the cell because it can't pass through that phospholipid bilayer. So these are basically all your hormones except those thyroid hormones that we're talking about here. So all those amino acid-based hormones. When in doubt, it's probably an amino acid-based hormone. There's only a few lipid-soluble hormones. The water-soluble hormones are going to act on receptors in the plasma membrane. They're within the plasma membrane because, again, these hormones can't pass through the plasma membrane. So those receptors are going to be in the membrane, and those hormones are going to dock to it. Now, if it's a lipid-soluble hormone, which are going to be those thyroid hormones and your estrogen and testosterone, they actually have no problem passing through the cell membrane. So they're going to go through the cell membrane and act on receptors that are within the cell. And they're going to directly activate genes. Remember, these hormones can cross the plasma membrane, so they can get inside the cell. We're first going to take a look at the water-soluble hormones. These are, again, your amino acid-derived hormones. These are going to be your amino acid-derived hormones, not those thyroid hormones. So with the water-soluble hormones, this is a series of events that occur. So it's not the hormone binds and then this happens. It's the hormone binds and then this happens and then this happens and then this happens. So it's a series of events. So the hormone is your first messenger. It's going to bind to a receptor. It's going to activate. When that happens, it's going to activate what's called a G protein. That G protein is then going to activate an enzyme, and that enzyme is going to activate a second messenger within that cell. So again, it's kind of a series of events that occur. So again, first, the hormone, also known as the first messenger, will bind to the receptor within the plasma membrane. That receptor activates what's called a G protein. So when the hormone binds to the receptor, what it does is it causes a change of shape, a conformational change, which activates another protein. G proteins activate an enzyme, and you need to know the name of that enzyme, adenylate cyclase. Adenylate cyclase converts, the purpose of it, converts ATP to a circle-shaped AMP. So ATP, remember, is adenosine triphosphate, and it's going to convert it to adenosine monophosphate, and that adenosine monophosphate is a circle-shaped molecule. So that's why it's called cyclic AMP, also known as CAMP. Now, this adenylate cyclase is a second messenger. I'm sorry, CAMP. The enzyme is acting on the second messenger. CAMP is then going to activate protein kinases within the cell, which are going to activate or inhibit proteins within that cell. So let's just kind of take a look at this handout here. You have this handout in your packet. I'm going to go through each step individually just so you can kind of see it a little bit better. So the first things first, we have our messenger right here, our hormone. Remember, that's our first messenger that's represented by these little pink spheres, and it's going to attach to this receptor. So you've got your phospholipid bilayer right here. Remember, that enzyme cannot cross that phospholipid bilayer, so it has to act outside the cell. So it's going to bind to this receptor. This receptor is going to make a change in shape when that binding happens. So it's going to then activate this G protein right here. It's going to activate that G protein. Now, that G protein is just going to come over here and bind to this adenylate cyclase enzyme, and it's going to activate that enzyme. And when that enzyme is activated, look right here, it is actually changing things within the cell. So this hormone on the outside of the cell is a result. The result of that is changing things happening inside the cell. So this adenylate cyclase is going to convert this ATP molecule to cyclic AMP. And then that is then going to cause these inactive proteins within the cell to become activated. Which, again, the activation of that enzyme, or I'm sorry, the activation of that protein could change things like activating enzymes, stimulating cellular secretions, open ion channels, and things like that. Now, if it's a lipid-soluble hormone, remember, these are going to be your steroid and your thyroid hormones. These can make changes. They can pass through the cell, pass through that plasma membrane, and act directly on what's happening inside the cell. So you have this handout here. Let me back up. You have this handout here in your notes. So you've got your steroid hormone right here. This steroid hormone, because it's lipid soluble, can easily pass through the membrane, through the cell membrane, and bind to a receptor within the cell. So here's the receptor right here. That steroid hormone is going to come in, and then it's going to form this receptor hormone complex right here. Now, this receptor hormone complex can then pass through the double phospholipid bilayer of the nucleus. This is the nucleus right here. It can pass through that double phospholipid bilayer in the nucleus and get into the nucleus. And when it does that, it can bind to DNA, causing the DNA to transcribe into various messenger RNAs. And you know that messenger RNAs are the instructions on how to make various proteins. So this is how that whole process works. And that is objective 6.